Night leaks into the barracks like spilled ink, and 1,000 empty stomachs growl in the dark. You'd think foxholes and tracer rounds would dominate the collective military nightmare of 1939-45. But no, ask any veteran what haunts his dreams, and he'll describe breakfast that tasted like damp cardboard and smelled faintly of industrial lubricant. Welcome, dear insomniac, to the edible underbelly of World War II, a conflict decided as much by caloric arithmetic as by artillery. The world's worst cookbook. Before even one helmet peeked over a Normandy hedgerow, armies faced the menu problem: how to feed millions of frightened amateurs in uniform without bankrupting the treasury or poisoning the clientele. The result was something history has politely classified as rations, but soldiers remember as crimes against cuisine. The U.S. War Department, ever the optimist, issued the K ration, 3 shoebox-sized packages labeled breakfast, dinner, and supper, as if polite nomenclature could hide the truth. Crack open breakfast and you'd find ham and egg slurry the consistency of pulverized chalk, 4 cigarettes because lung capacity is overrated, a lemonade powder that fizzed like battery acid, and exactly 1 square of toilet paper. Think of it as a grim joke from the Quartermaster Corps. Make it count, Private. Dinner was a warm embrace from Lady Despair herself. Cheese spread immune to sunlight, crackers capable of cracking teeth, and a chocolate bar engineered by the Hershey Company to survive magma. By supper, the designers had abandoned all pretense, gifting you meat and beans, contents withheld to protect the innocent, plus reruns of the same crackers and gum. Soldiers swapped cans like prison inmates, bartering cigarettes for favors, each searching for the mythical component that didn't taste like post-apocalyptic wallpaper paste. Yet the K ration looked Michelin-starred beside its evil cousin, the D ration. Imagine a slab of cocoa-colored concrete so dense it bent light. Now imagine the army ordering millions of them and labeling them emergency chocolate. Bite it and risk dental bankruptcy. Attempt to melt it and watch it laugh at your campfire. It provided 600 calories, 0 joy, and lasting trauma. Veterans decades later still twitched at the sight of a Hershey wrapper, like Pavlov's dogs, but with more profanity. Field kitchens offered a fleeting reprieve. Steaming vats of creamed chipped beef, nickname unprintable, beans stewed in existential dread, and coffee strong enough to dissolve buttons. Soldiers queued under sleet, helmets doubling as dinnerware, and inhaled whatever sludge hit their tray. If it was hot, vaguely salty, and didn't crawl away, morale soared. Blitzkrieg à la carte crossed the lines to the early war German Wehrmacht, and you'd find rye bread, smoked sausage, butter, and marmalade, a Teutonic picnic that could almost make invasion feel like a holiday. Logistics worked. Kitchens followed the regiments like faithful Dachshunds, and every mess tin smelled of pork fat and inevitability. But as the Reich overstretched and winter gnawed on the Eastern Front, abundance withered. Sausage became rumor. Bread was bulked with sawdust. Ersatz coffee, roasted acorns masquerading as caffeine, arrived to insult the wounded. By 1943, the once slick war machine survived on frozen potatoes, chipped out of permafrost, and tins of meat of indeterminate species: horse, mule, perhaps some unlucky propaganda officer. Soldiers boiled snow for soup and fought rats for crumbs. A single captured American chocolate bar could buy you loyalty, friendship, or in especially dark hours, a will to keep breathing. Cabbage and courage. Soviet soldiers stared into bowls of watery cabbage and called it borscht with a straight face. Calories were scarce. Patriotism, they were told, was edible. When official rations vanished, Red Army troops turned forager, scouring shell-scarred villages for beets, potatoes buried beneath ice, even flower bulbs. They joked that they farted more than they fired, and that the smell alone might repel the Germans. Somehow, it almost did. Yet the Eastern Front still managed culinary one-upmanship. Legend speaks of a Soviet patrol who, after seizing a German field kitchen, threw a victory feast featuring bratwurst roasted over burning Nazi propaganda leaflets. Irony never tasted so smoky. The empire of tea and dentistry. Meanwhile, British Tommies waged private war against bully beef, canned corned beef that quivered like jelly, and hardtack biscuits tough enough to patch tank armor. What kept them alive wasn't nutrition, but scalding tea consumed hourly, with or without milk, sugar, or hope. One sapper in Burma allegedly refused an amputation until he'd finished his brew, prompting the surgeon to mutter that Earl Grey would outlive the empire. Rice balls and really bad luck. In the Pacific, Japanese infantry were issued rice, dried fish, and pickled plums packed neatly into lacquered boxes. Shinto elegance in a hellish jungle. Trouble was, humidity turned rice to mush, maggots added surprise protein, and Allied blockades starved entire regiments into foraging for frogs. Some units boiled tree bark, others ate their leather belts. Headquarters preached spiritual nourishment, which, last anyone checked, contained no calories. Culinary Darwinism. Across every camp and crater, soldiers hacked their rations like desperate chefs on a dystopian cooking show. Americans crushed crackers into powder, mixed with lemonade, and called it foxhole cake. Brits fried bully beef with raisins. Desert pudding. Soviets invented trench fondue, melting confiscated German cheese over engine manifolds. Gastronomy died. Improvisation kept breathing. Aftertaste of victory. When peace finally wheezed across the continents, veterans went home and kissed civilians, then spat politely into handkerchiefs because memories of powdered eggs wouldn't rinse out. Some never touched chocolate again. Others hoarded it in basement shrines, a sweet reminder that even war contains miracles. Ask an old GI about the Battle of the Bulge, and he'll recount two fronts. One against Hitler, the other against constipation. The smell of cordite might have faded from Europe, but on the freshly inked parchment of the United States Constitution, another scent wafted upward, a nose-curling mix of corn mash, frontier sweat, and political panic. It was 1791, and Alexander Hamilton, a man who measured life in columns of numbers and ribbons of debt, stared at the newborn republic's staggering IOUs and muttered, "Pass the whistle, whiskey tax." Hamilton's hair of the debt cure Congress, still suffering from collective war hangover, swallowed Hamilton's proposal, an excise of about 7 cents a gallon on domestic distilled spirits. In Philadelphia parlors and Boston coffee houses, gentlemen dabbed their lips and nodded sagely. After all, they drank imported Madeira, not backwoods hooch. But 300 miles west, where Appalachia's blue ridges shrugged off civilization, the news landed like a splintered musket butt to the teeth. Out there, whiskey wasn't a luxury. It was liquid currency. Grain you could sip, sell, or swap for a cast-iron skillet. A horse could cost 20 gallons. A doctor's visit? Maybe 8, with a half-pint tip if the leeches didn't kill you. Tax whiskey, and you weren't tapping revenue. You were squeezing the entire frontier economy in a bureaucratic vice. The barrels begin to boil. In log cabins and smoky taverns, a slow, righteous anger fermented. Wasn't this republic built on no taxation without representation? Farmers asked, while topping off stoneware jugs. Representation, they discovered, meant a congressman 2 weeks' ride and several river crossings away. Hardly a neighbor you could slap with a glove. Soon, U.S. Marshals sent to record stills and tally gallons were greeted with twin muzzles and sarcasm. "Morning, sir. Care for a dram before the tar warms." One taxman was scalped, only metaphorically, by having his queue lopped off and displayed above a tavern door like a trophy raccoon. Another had his paperwork torched. He rode home half-clothed, muttering Latin curses he barely understood. These were not isolated incidents. They were chapter headings in a book rapidly titled Things That Make George Washington Grind His Wooden Teeth, of conventions, committees, and corn liquor congresses. By 1793, rebels disguised their meetings as social gatherings, barn raisings where more rye was mashed than nails driven, harvest festivals where resolutions were drafted between fiddle tunes. Delegates from western counties met at Liberty Poles, essentially a tree trunk with both bark and pretense stripped away, to denounce the tax and brainstorm alternatives, most of which involved Hamilton being stuffed into an empty barrel and rolled down the Alleghenies. Petitions went east, subpoenas came west. Each pile of parchment was ignored with equal enthusiasm. The real tipping point arrived July 1794. John Neville, a fortified tax inspector living in a mansion ominously named Bower Hill, attempted to serve writs to distillers who'd skipped their day in court. Armed locals surrounded the estate, muskets glittering in the sun like bad intentions. Shots rang, smoke curled, 2 rebels and a U.S. soldier fell. In the volatile mathematics of rebellion, bloodshed multiplied grievances by the power of myth. The next morning, 600 men mustered, whiskey fumes thick enough to pickle stray chickens. They torched Bower Hill, Neville narrowly escaping through a hail of lead and curses. Enter the reluctant general-in-chief. Word galloped to Philadelphia, where President Washington listened, jaw set like Mount Vernon's granite hearth. Many urged caution. These were veterans of Valley Forge, fellow countrymen, hot-blooded but redeemable. Hamilton, however, saw in their defiance an existential threat. If the fledgling federal law could be swatted aside by pitchforks, the grand constitutional experiment would implode faster than a souffle in a stampede. After sleepless nights pacing executive mansion corridors, Washington detonated the decision. An army, 12,000 strong, would march west. It dwarfed the force he'd commanded at the Battle of Princeton, and he would ride at its head, the only sitting U.S. president ever to do so, cloaked not in revelry, but reluctant resolve. Across the Appalachians, the news hit rebel camps like a November frost. The same man whose face adorned tavern walls as the patron saint of independence was now poised to arrive with artillery. Bravado curdled. Some leaders fled into Kentucky's uncharted woods. Others attempted half-hearted apologies. A few simply went home, claiming they'd never liked whiskey anyway, a lie detectable by smell. When the federal host finally sloshed through October mud into Pittsburgh's outskirts, they found no pitched battle, only scattered farmhouses, sullen silence, and the odd abandoned still bubbling sadly in the chill air. The rebellion, for all its fiery rhetoric, evaporated in the presence of presidential steel. Trials, treason, and 2 lucky fellows. 20 alleged ringleaders were plucked from barns and cellars, frog-marched eastward, and arraigned for high treason. Witnesses hemmed, hawed, and misplaced memories. Ultimately, jurors convicted only 2 poor souls. Philip Vigal, a gaunt blacksmith whose chief talent was being in the wrong place, and John Mitchell, a stone-faced farmer who, rumor said, couldn't pour milk without curdling it with rage. The sentencing scaffold loomed, until Washington pulled the ultimate executive sleight of hand, a pardon. Mercy, he believed, would corrode martyrdom faster than a noose could tighten it. Hamilton swallowed his disappointment like a too-dry biscuit, but the gesture resonated. The federal government possessed both the muscle to enforce and the wisdom to relent. Fallout on the frontier, seeds of red and blue. If you listened closely after the troops marched home, you could hear new political parties sprout. Westerners, convinced that coastal elites viewed them as tax cattle, drifted to Thomas Jefferson's Republican camp, where states' rights and limited government were becoming fashionable slogans. Federalists, headquartered in New York counting houses and New England libraries, congratulated themselves for saving the Republic from drunken mob rule. America discovered it had ideological fault lines, and they ran through every cornfield and counting house that smelled faintly of ethanol. The whiskey tax itself, a lame duck. Collection costs outstripped revenue. Evasion became Appalachian sport. By 1802, President Jefferson quietly repealed it, burying Hamilton's excise in an unmarked grave next to the national patience. Barrels, myths, and the national hangover. Yet the rebellion never truly died. In dim taverns from Pennsylvania to Tennessee, storytellers toasted Old Tom the Tinker, a folkloric phantom said to sabotage stills of any farmer who dared pay the tax. Frontier mothers threatened unruly children with "Alexander Hamilton will get ya," and each time a distiller thumped a fresh barrel, he heard echoes of 1794 sloshing inside. Washington's march forged a precedent. Federal supremacy would not wilt before regional insurrection. Lincoln would cite it when federal troops re-entered rebellious states with more cannon and less whiskey. State governors in the 20th century would recall it when calling National Guardsmen to desegregate schools or break strikes. Meanwhile, every poured glass of bourbon became a tiny, amber-lit memorial to backwoods stubbornness. Sip of perspective. Consider this. Had the whiskey tax succeeded, American drinking culture might resemble Europe's. More wine, less barrel char. Instead, farmers pushed deeper into Kentucky's bluegrass hollows and Tennessee's limestone valleys, perfecting sour mash and rye spice. They named their spirits after patriots, Evan Williams, revolutionary generals, Knob Creek, and eventually the rebellion itself, Old Whiskey Rebellion Rye. Irony ages well in oak. So the next time you knock back a finger of amber and feel it burn with frontier fire, remember you're tasting more than corn, rye, and charred oak. You're sipping civil disobedience, presidential resolve, and a handshake, equal parts forgiveness and warning, between George Washington and every citizen who would ever contemplate telling Uncle Sam to keep his hands off the still. Imagine history dropping the courtroom gavel long before powdered wigs, before gavels were even a twinkle in a carpenter's eye. The ancient Near East is buzzing. Merchants haggle over lapis lazuli, ox carts creak through dusty gates, and somewhere in Babylon a scribe wipes sweat from his brow and presses a reed stylus into wet clay. If a woman is caught in adultery, bind her and the man together and throw them into the river. With that splash, the world's first heavily footnoted patriarchy cannonballs into legal precedent. Clay tablets and cold justice, Hammurabi's Babylon king. Hammurabi, circa 1754 BCE, surveys his empire of canals, barley, and occasionally cooperative neighbors. He orders a basalt monolith taller than the average giraffe, carves 282 laws on it, and parks it in the temple courtyard. Picture the whole thing glowing under Mesopotamian sunlight while priests nod approvingly. Now everyone will behave. Spoiler, they won't. For women, Hammurabi's Code is a choose-your-own-adventure novel where every page ends in a pitfall. As a daughter, you're a debit on dad's ledger. As a wife, you're a warranty on family honor. As a widow, you're a trustee guarding property for sons still learning fractions. If accused of adultery, you can prove innocence by leaping into the Euphrates. Survive the current and you're acquitted. Sink like an amphora and, well, case closed. Meanwhile, a husband can chase sheep with half the ziggurat choir and face only stern side-eye if he's discreet. Yet nestled amid the punitive currents are curious life rafts of protection. Widows may stay in their late husbands' homes and manage orchards until junior heirs sprout facial hair. A woman whose spouse deserts her can remarry without being labeled Babylon's Jezebel. It's as though Hammurabi scrawled, "Men, behave," then looked at women and whispered, Sorry, I did what I could. Lotus crowns and papyrus receipts. Egyptian exceptions. Sail southwest to Egypt, where the Nile's annual flood is calmer than palace gossip. Here the goddess Ma'at personifies cosmic balance, and scribes record contracts like caffeinated accountants. Unlike their Babylonian sisters, Egyptian women sign those contracts. They inherit land, sue troublesome neighbors, and foreclose on deadbeat cousins, all with the elegance of a lotus-per-hand manicure. Papyrus deeds survive, showing women hiring laborers to harvest flax, then suing said laborers when they disappear with the tools. One feisty lady named Mutuya drags her brother to court because he tried to snag mom's jewelry. The magistrate sides with her. Big bro forks over the amulets. Lesson learned. Do not mess with Egyptian estate law or your sister's bling. But don't uncork the celebratory date wine yet. Society still expects obedience to male guardians, and temple reliefs immortalize queens only beside pharaohs or gods. Every right is hedged by custom. Yes, she may own a granary, but at festivals she's parked behind a screen lest unmarried men faint at the sight of her ankles. Freedom, meet formality. Please play nice. Dharma, dowries, and the Manusmriti maze. Hop across deserts and ocean spray to ancient India, where sages argue under banyan trees and legal philosophy thickens like ghee in midsummer. The Manusmriti, compiled between 200 BCE and 200 CE, announces in melodic Sanskrit that women are to be honored where the gods rejoice. Lovely sentiment until you read the footnote. Honor equals guardianship from cradle to cremation. Marriage is the spinal column of Dharma. A bride arrives with dowry, a groom brings lineage, and fate brings optimism. If hubby abandons her, she must wait for his potential return like a glitchy homing pigeon. If she seeks escape, she requires a rabbinic-style council of male relatives to approve. Evidence of beatings or starvation helps her case, but good luck securing ring light illumination for the trial. Yet the subcontinent resists monotone. In Kerala, matrilineal Nair families will chuckle at Manusmriti, while aunties manage estates and uncles move into their wives' houses. A widowed queen in Tamilakam can raise armies. A Buddhist monastery in Taxila might teach girls medicine. Indian law is a patchwork sari, brilliant silk panels stitched with conservative thread. Purple cloaks and Spartan sandals. Greece, the study in contrasts. Fast forward to 5th century Athens, where democracy's golden tongue pronounces freedom for all, unless all is female. A citizen woman spends life behind the gynoecium courtyard wall, spinning wool and praying her dowry ledger survives mildew. She can't vote, own vineyards, or speak in court without a male guardian, kurios, chucking words across the courtroom like pottery shards. Adultery laws here out, Babylon, Babylon. If an Athenian wife is caught canoodling, her lover may be executed on the spot. The cuckold has state-sponsored permission. Contrast that with her husband visiting hetairai, high-class courtesans, between philosophy lectures. No penalty, just a philosophical shrug. Then head to Sparta, where laws eat raw meat for breakfast. Spartan girls exercise naked alongside boys, throwing javelins under the sun because strong mothers birth stronger hoplites. They inherit half the land, manage households while husbands terrorize Persia, and fire snappy one-liners. Asked why Spartan women rule men, Queen Gorgo replies, because we are the only women who give birth to men. Even Aristotle grumbled that Spartan women wielded license while Athenian wives resembled cloistered treasures. Togas, ledgers and vestal flame insurance, Roman realities. Now roll into Rome on a rickety cart, dirhams rattling in your purse. Roman women start life under patria potestas, dad's iron umbrella. But marriage style matters. If she weds sine manu, without hand, her legal tether stays with Papa, letting her hold property, lend money, and sue, essentially Rome's loophole for empowered matrons. Upper-class widows become real estate magnates, buying apartment blocks on the Aventine and renting to legionary retirees. One Matidia funds a public bath. Another, Cecilia Metella, orders a mausoleum so large it doubles as GPS for lost shepherds. Yet moralists like Augustus slam the brakes with adultery laws. Stray from your marital bed, and you risk exile to a barren island where the only nightlife is phosphorescent surf. Still, Rome offers peculiar avenues of female authority. The 6 Vestal virgins enjoy autonomy unimaginable elsewhere. They can own estates, free condemned prisoners with a touch, and travel the city without male escort, on pain of being buried alive should they break their 30-year vow of chastity. Liberty meet lethal fine print. Law by lantern light. Hebrews, Persians, and Confucian courts. In ancient Judea, Torah scrolls flicker under lamp oil as rabbis debate ketubah clauses. A bride's marriage contract lists silver weight owed if divorce or death sever the union, and early prenuptial cushioning against widowhood poverty. She cannot initiate divorce solo, but under certain abuse claims, the Beth Din rabbinic court might coerce hubby into a get, a legal writ of release, spiritual Wi-Fi unplugged. Across the Persian plateau, Achaemenid queens like Atassa sign rations for thousands of workers on clay tablets stored at Persepolis. If an orchard owner defaults on taxes, a royal woman steward can confiscate his goats faster than you can pronounce Cyrus. Persian elite women march in parade chariots, yet ordinary wives live within Zoroastrian purity codes, menstrual seclusion huts and all. Turn east to Han Dynasty China. Confucius preaches filial piety while magistrates codify it. A woman may not litigate alone. Her brother or adult son voices grievances in court. Still, contracts exist where dowries remain separate property, a micro-shield against lousy in-laws. Empress Lu and later Wu Zetian will warp laws entirely, ruling as de facto emperors, proving that when patriarchy cracks, an ambitious woman can pour through like molten bronze. What the law giveth, custom taketh string these civilizations together, and a pattern surfaces like a watermark. Lawmen immortalize women's duties in ink or stone, then slip limited rights in the margins. When crises arrive, plague, invasion, dynastic collapse, those margins widen. Egyptian widows run breweries during famine. Roman matrons bankroll grain imports when senators' purses shrivel. Spartan mothers admonish sons to return with your shield or on it, turning maternal grief into state propaganda. Necessity is the mother of, well, mothers running the show. But stability returns, officials tighten screws, and the next generation of daughters hears the lock click once more. Progress is less a staircase than an accordion, expanding, collapsing, always wheezing the same bittersweet tune. Courts of sand, river, and marble, shared themes, guardianship as governance, whether kurios, tutela, or paterfamilias, male oversight is the universal language of ancient legality. Honor economics, a woman's chastity equals family capital. Adultery is larceny of reputation, punished with water ordeal, stoning, or island exile. Property is power, where women can own land, Egypt, late Republic Rome, certain Persian circles, they wield leverage, where Bard, Athens, Manusmriti heartlands, autonomy withers. Widowhood pivot, husbands dying in wars or plagues inadvertently emancipate spouses. Widows become managers, litigants, patrons of temples, and in rare spicy chapters, paramours of poetry-writing philosophers. Religion's double edge. Temples guard female virtue, yet also gatekeep their agency. Vestal virginhood liberates and endangers. Sati elevates devotion and annihilates the devotee. Passing the docket to the future. The parchment trail winds onward. Medieval dowry registers, Renaissance witch trials, suffrage petitions, but its first ink stains remain visible. Every modern debate on workplace equality, marital consent, or reproductive rights echoes these early verdicts pronounced by sunburned scribes beside flooding rivers. The ancient courtroom dramas were never just about women. They were societal stress tests. How a civilization weighs half its population against property, piety, and power reveals its true hierarchy of values. Sometimes the scales tip toward unexpected fairness, an Egyptian daughter inheriting her father's vineyard, sometimes toward brutal spectacle, an Athenian adulteress paraded to the magistrate like contraband. Yet each case carved grooves into humanity's legal DNA, grooves modern law still traces, sometimes to follow, sometimes to avoid. So raise your clay tablet, or your cocktail napkin masquerading as one, and toast to the litigants of antiquity, to the Babylonian wife who dove into the Euphrates and lived, to the Spartan heiress who flexed her spear-trained biceps at creditors, to the Roman matron who rented tenements and ignored gossip, and to every unnamed daughter who hid a wax-sealed contract under her tunic, betting the farm on precedent. Their testimonies echo through marble ruins and museum display cases, reminding us that the battle over autonomy didn't start with suffragettes or social media. It began the moment someone chiseled "if a woman" and forgot to add, "decides for herself." Picture a Sumerian farmer trundling his ox cart toward the ziggurat at Ur around 2100 BCE. The cart is piled with barley sheaves shimmering gold in the Mesopotamian sun. He's not making an offering to Enlil for good weather, at least not exclusively. He's making a deposit. The temple granary, stacked higher than any city wall, is the era's safest vault. Priests in linen skirts greet him with solemn nods, weigh the grain on basalt scales, and press a clay receipt into his palm. Voila, balance credited. If he ever needs seed or food before next harvest, he redeems that tablet at the same temple window, paying interest in kind, naturally. Long-distance Venmo, Bronze Age edition. When the gods became bankers. Temples were banks because gods don't skip town in the night. You could trust Ninurta to guard your barley more than old Ibisin 2 doors down who might blow it all on date beer. Priests, custodians of divine credit ratings, kept ledgers so orderly modern accountants would weep in envy. Every deposit, quantity, quality, depositor, witness, date, whether the barley was red or white, even humidity notes. From those tablets emerged the world's first transferable IOUs. If I owe you 10 shekels of silver, I can hand over a clay docket that says the temple already holds that silver for me. You take the docket to the same priesthood, the silver changes custody, and we never lug a single glinting ingot through bandit-infested countryside. Interest rates high. Grain loans usually ran about 20% annually. Silver, an eyebrow singing 33%. But remember, there were no FDIC stickers, no central bank backstops. A locust swarm or flood could wipe out the collateral overnight. Lenders wanted hazard pay, receipts, risks, and the first credit crashes. Every few generations, Mesopotamian kings looked at their kingdom's debt pressure gauge. Peasant families falling into slavery, smallholders forfeiting fields, and hit the reset button. They called it an emargy, or freedom. All agrarian debts wiped, bonded laborers home in time for supper, the economy rebooted like a reed boat after a sandbar snag. Modern policymakers theorize about debt jubilees as radical. Hammurabi considered them routine maintenance, lest the social engine seize. Of course, temple coffers felt the sting. Priests muttered but complied, though they quietly diversified, investing in caravan ventures to Dilmun or copper mines in Oman, hedging against royal amnesties with international revenue streams. The gods, it seems, understood portfolio management. Egyptian granaries. The Nile's central bank drift west to Egypt, where the Nile's rhythmic flooding delivers predictably lush valley soil and an equally predictable tsunami of bureaucracy. Pharaoh's scribes decided grain itself would be money. Every provincial granary functioned like a branch of an enormous national reserve. A farmer paid taxes in wheat, Soldiers earned wages in wheat. Priests assessed tithes in wheat. The state issued tallies on papyrus slips, the ancient Egyptian equivalent of bearer bonds, good for redeeming flour anywhere from Memphis to Elephantine. During the New Kingdom, a scribe named Hori writes to his buddy Meru, "I have debited your account 9 sacks of barley. Please credit me with 2 strong donkeys at Thebes." Translation: Hori just bought livestock using a line of grain credit. No coin required. When actual metal currency finally rolls in during Persian rule, Egyptians treat it like trinkets. Handy for foreign trade, sure, but you can't bake bread out of silver. Private lenders, public peril. Wherever temples and treasuries accumulated wealth, freelancers sniffed opportunity. In Babylon's Isin Larsa period, families of money men, the cuneiform tamkaru, set up living room counters. They'd store your silver for a smaller fee than the temple, bankroll caravan expeditions to Anatolia, and underwrite risky ventures like timber shipping down the Euphrates. One prospering house, the firm of Nasir, yes, the same copper dealer whose complaint tablet went viral on the internet 4 millennia later, loaned ore samples to artisans on consignment. When his copper arrived subpar, customers clogged the alley with curses and refund demands, a Bronze Age Yelp meltdown. Even then, reputation could bankrupt you faster than barbarians at the gate. Coinage crashes the party. 6th century BCE, Lydia mints the first state-stamped electrum coins, each emblazoned with a roaring lion's head. Suddenly value travels in your purse, not on a clay roster behind temple doors. Money-changing booths bloom across the Aegean like spring anemones. Greek trapezites sit at 3-legged tables inside agora colonnades, clinking coins, biting electrum to test purity, and scribbling exchange rates on wax tablets. A Corinthian drachma won't buy as much bread in Samos. The money changer pockets a fee lubricating the difference. Athens takes the concept nuclear. By Pericles' day, the city floats an empire on silver owls from Laurian mines. Allies pay tribute into the Delian League treasury, where money changers melt mixed coin into Athenian standard pieces, a fiscal assimilation program. And guess who manages the cash? The Temple of Athena on the Acropolis, of course. Democracy may debate policy down below, but up on the sacred rock the goddess counts coins. Maritime loans and 100% interest. Greek financiers invent the maritime loan, ancestor of venture capital, plus balloon rate mortgage, plus adrenaline overdose. A trader planning a voyage to Syracuse loans 5,000 drachma from Passion the banker. Contract states, if the ship returns safely within 3 months, Passion gets back principal plus 100% interest. If pirates, Poseidon, or a stray Spartan trireme sinks the cargo, lender loses everything. No wonder they demanded proof of sacrifice to Poseidon before signing. Court speeches from orator Demosthenes preserve juicy disputes. One merchant claims his partner scuttled the ship for insurance fraud. Another begs jurors to forgive late repayment because contrary winds stranded him in Byzantium, ancient version of "the dog ate my homework." The jury, comprised of 501 crotchety Athenian citizens, probably enjoyed these soap operas more than afternoon tragoedia. Rome, from coin collectors to corporate contractors. Now cue marching trumpets and bring in the Romans. As soon as they conquer a province, they build roads, aqueducts, and, less visibly, credit lines. The Argentarii run counters in the Forum, but big capital resides with the Publicani. Corporate syndicates chartered to collect taxes, supply legions, and exploit mining concessions. Think Wall Street investment banks with centurion bodyguards. A senator couldn't legally dabble in commerce, so he invested via front men. Cicero's letters glow with gossip about interest rates in Cilicia. One year he brags of a 12% yield. The next he laments clients defaulting because barbarians torched their vineyards. Risk never sleeps. The real Roman supertool is law. Contracts are enforceable across 3 continents. Miss a payment, and your villa is on the auction block faster than you can mutter Veni Vidi Visa. Courts even recognize hypotheca, non-possessory collateral, allowing borrowers to pledge assets without handing them over. Modern mortgage law tips its toga in thanks. But Rome's appetite outgrows its silver supply. Emperors start skimming coin purity. Nero debases the denarius from 98% to 93%, Caracalla down to 50%, and by Gallienus it's bronze with a silver wash, chocolate coins of the ancient world. Prices soar, soldiers riot for real pay, and Diocletian issues an edict on maximum prices that vendors ignore because economics doesn't salute imperial decrees. Sound familiar? Inflation has been ghostwriting history since the first mint fired up. Women behind the counting tables. Banking wasn't an all-boys coliseum. In Ptolemaic Egypt, a woman named Ptolemus manages her own lending portfolio. Papyri show her suing delinquent borrowers with lawyerly ferocity. In Rome, freed women like Navalea Tyche run pawn shops. Tomb inscriptions record them as Argentaria, female bankers. Even Babylonian widow Iltani loans silver to caravan leaders at temple competitive rates, proving that glass ceilings crack when profit leaks through. Faith, fraud and foreclosure, temples under siege. Sacred vaults weren't invincible. When Antiochus IV storms Jerusalem in 67 BCE, his soldiers loot the Second Temple treasury, yanking golden lampstands and, critically, promissory tablets, erasing livelihoods overnight. Faithful protest, rebellion brews, but the money is gone. Moral, diversify. Even divine deposit insurance can be revoked by invading cavalry. How to cash a check in 200 BCE. Stroll to the trapezoite cedar wood desk. Present clay or papyrus receipt signed by 2 witnesses. Banker compares sigils, tests weight of counter-depositing coins, subtracts 1/60th as fee. He hands you silver staters stamped with Alexander's profile, or writes a fresh draft to Corinth if you're sailing out tomorrow. You celebrate at the wine shop, then hide half the cash in your sandal, because pickpockets also predate the alphabet. Financial regulation. Ancient-style Mesopotamian kings issue debt cancellations. Greek polis cap interest at outrage-inducing yet arguably sustainable levels. The Old Testament bans usury among Israelites but encourages earning on foreigners. Divine permission for different credit tiers. Rome invents daylight robbery laws like Lex Gabinia against extortionate provincial governors, but looks the other way when Crassus buys cheap burning property during fires and rents it back later. Every epoch juggles liberty and oversight, always dropping one. Crisis and innovation dance a 2-step. Whenever war drains treasuries, states experiment. During the Peloponnesian War, Athens melts temple gold with priestly IOUs to mint emergency coins. Hannibal prowls Italy and Roman bankers freeze lending. In response, landowners issue private bronze tokens usable at local markets, a proto-coupon economy. Crisis births creativity, and bankers like cockroaches adapt. From tablets to touchscreens, DNA of a deposit. Take any modern savings account, peel off plastic cards and HTTPS encryption, and underneath lies the same skeleton. A promise recorded, a system that everyone agrees to respect, and an enforcement mechanism when someone breaks the promise. Ancient priests used divine wrath. Modern banks use credit scores and courts. Different costumes, identical script. When you photograph your paycheck for mobile deposit, imagine a Babylonian farmer watching his clay receipt dry in the sun 4,000 years ago. He trusted that slab to feed his family through winter. You trust a server farm in suburban Ohio. Both of you are placing faith in an invisible network of guarantees and praying locusts, literal or digital, don't swarm before payday. Why temples lost the monopoly? Religion once equaled stability, but as states centralized power, kings wanted those sweet revenue streams. Coinage weakened temples. Portable value diminished the need for sacred vaults. Secular courts matured, offering contract enforcement without divine intermediaries. By late antiquity, professional guilds of bankers, insurers, and traders outpaced priestly scribes. The gods, released from bookkeeping, returned to philosophical contemplation, or thunderbolt chucking, depending on denomination. A sip of silver to the ancients. Next time your banking app pings, whisper a thank you to anonymous Mesopotamian accountants, Egyptian granary clerks, Athenian money changers, Persian estate mistresses, and Roman argentarii. They invented the backbone of capitalism with reed pens, abacus beads, and more blind faith than any IPO prospectus. And remember, interest rates fall, bubbles burst, empires topple, but someone, somewhere, will always set up a table in the marketplace, count coins, and offer to double your investment if you'll just sign here in fresh clay. By the time Rome's last legions melted into mercenary warbands and the Western Empire breathed its dusty, bureaucratic last, the old Mediterranean credit lines that once carried silver from Spain to Syria snapped like worn rigging in a gale. Trade shrank, cities emptied, and for a while European money did little more than jingle inside the reliquaries of impecunious monasteries. Yet commerce, like water, always seeks a channel. When one route silts up, another springs from the hillside. Follow that new rivulet, and you find yourself in the stalls of a medieval fair, in the shadow of minarets along a desert caravan trail, or in the counting rooms of Tuscan wool merchants meticulously scratching columns of Arabic numerals onto rough paper. The early Middle Ages did not lack enterprise. They lacked small, round objects with kingly faces. Coin shortages forced traders to improvise, and so they turned fairs into financial engines. Champagne in northern France hosted 6 enormous market cycles a year, each one transforming patchwork farmland into a tent city alive with Flemish cloth, Andalusian sugar, Baltic furs, and 1,000 languages colliding over cups of rough wine. But how do you pay a Lombard spice dealer when your purse holds only local deniers and his bookkeeping mind calculates in Florentine florins? The merchants created a language of handshakes, ink, and promises. Enter the fair banker, the camp sores from Lombardy who carried wax tablets and uncanny memories of exchange rates. A Burgundian wool man might hand them a cloth bale as collateral, receive a slip of parchment acknowledging its value, and then stroll 3 avenues down to redeem gold bezants from a partner agent under a striped awning. Those parchments, sealed, witnessed, portable, were the grandchildren of Babylonian clay receipts, but lighter, faster, and backed not by gods but by merchant guild reputation. Break faith with the network and you were done across Europe. While monks intoned psalms in stone choirs, the real chant of medieval prosperity drifted along Muslim caravan routes. Under the Umayyad and Abbasid caliphates, streets from Cordoba to Samarkand thrummed with round dinars of high-purity gold and square pieces of folded paper called sak, the first true checks. An Iraqi trader who sold indigo in Basra could deposit earnings with a local saraf, receive a coded note, ride his camel across 2 deserts, present the note in Damascus, and withdraw the same value minus an agreed fee. The bank didn't mail the money. It moved entries in a ledger as elegantly as a calligrapher's stroke. Caravan robbery still existed, but most thieves preferred loot with immediate resale value. A cryptic slip of paper endorsed by a banker and sealed with Quranic verses? Not worth the risk of unbelieving usage. Thus faith once again buttressed finance, only now the god in question was singular, invisible, and fervently defended by legal scholars drafting contract law called fiqh al-muamalat. Islamic jurists frowned on interest, labeling it riba, but human ingenuity rarely bows for long. Profit-sharing partnerships blossomed instead. The mudaraba allowed a silent investor to furnish capital, while a traveling merchant supplied sweat and savvy. Gains were split by formula. Losses struck the investor alone, unless negligence could be proven, in which case courts enforced restitution with grim impartiality. European crusaders might sneer at Saracen sophistry, yet they borrowed these mechanisms as eagerly as they hijacked Arabic algebra. By the 12th century, Italian port cities were awash in terminology lifted straight from Arabic record books. The very word check echoes sac, just as Tarif shadows the seaport of Tarfia, and arsenal recalls the Dar al-Shina, house of manufacturing, in Venice's Moorish-tinged lagoon. Venice herself became an experiment in civic banking, with deep-draft galleys penetrating Black Sea ports and spice fleets converging from Alexandria. The city needed a unit of account immune to the weight-cheating of petty princes. So the Senate cultivated the grossi and later the ghost currency of the ducat banco, existing mainly in ledgers at the Rialto. When plague thinned the population and coin again grew scarce, Venice compelled its citizens to deposit hard money with the state-run Banco di Rialto in exchange for book credit accepted universally within the lagoon. It was involuntary nationalization disguised as patriotic duty, and it worked because Venice's navy, courts, and merchants agreed to pretend the fiction was solid as marble. If that sounds suspiciously like modern fiat currency, congratulations, you've traced the lira back to a forced savings account on a damp sandbar. Meanwhile, landlocked Florence sharpened the pencil to a murdering point. Wool merchants there faced slim margins and vicious competition from Flanders. Counting errors meant ruin, so they adopted double-entry bookkeeping, an import whispered along trade routes from Muslim Spain. One page recorded debits, the opposite credits. The totals had to match, or some apprentice spent the night flogging abacuses beneath sputtering oil lamps. This simple mirror transformed chaos into clarity. Cosimo de' Medici, grandson of a doctor but heir to a textile fortune, financed papal alum mines, war loans to dukes, and art that still dazzles 5 centuries on, all because his clerks could prove to skeptical shareholders exactly where every florin sat at sunset. The Medici Bank did not keep treasure chests in its storefront. It kept accounts in branch offices from Bruges to London. A Milanese silk buyer would walk into the Bruges branch, deposit Flemish pounds, and receive a letter of exchange to present in Florence, where a relative could collect florins at a favorable rate. Medici agents used hand-ciphered exchange tables factoring in risk days, transport cost, and political instability. When a sovereign defaulted, they leveraged diplomatic pressure, sending agents disguised as bishops or music tutors to negotiate repayment schedules. Modern sovereign debt restructuring looks tame by comparison, but success bred jealousy. Rival Florentine houses spread rumors of Medici heresy, bribed cardinals, and at last used French invasion to topple the dynasty's bank. The once unbreakable ledger line snapped, scattering small investors like starlings. Yet the technique of dual-column balance survived, migrating north with merchants fleeing war. In the hands of Dutch bookkeepers, it blossomed into comprehensive corporate accounting for joint stock ventures like the Verenigde Oostindische Compagnie. But that is tomorrow's storm. Across the Alps, German silver mines in the Harz and Tyrol fed Augsburg's Fugger family with rivers of coin. Jakob Fugger learned from Italian correspondence banks, yet introduced something new. Large-scale underwriting of monarchs in exchange for mining concessions and political favors. He lent to the Habsburgs to buy imperial elections, accepted repayment in copper rights, then cornered the market. When Martin Luther railed against the selling of indulgences, it was Fugger credit that allowed Archbishop Albrecht to buy his see and subsequently hawk spiritual get-out-of-purgatory slips to recoup the loan. The Reformation's economic prelude was written on Fugger account sheets, ink-staining parchment in tidy Gothic script. Medieval Jews, barred from guilds and farmland by church edict, became crucial moneylenders to kings and commoners. Anti-usury laws pushed Christian lenders into subterfuge, while Jewish financiers operated in daylight, protected and exploited by royal charters that could be revoked at whim. They invented elastic workarounds, charging fees for late repayment instead of upfront interest, or taking pawn collateral redeemable with a modest premium. When debts grew inconvenient, rulers often staged pogroms or expulsions, wiping accounts along with populations. Finance remained as perilous as plague. Further east, the Mongol-created Pax Mongolica did wonders for wire transfers, if one counts horsehair pouches stuffed with silver as wires. Caravanseries dotting the Silk Road from Khiva to Dunhuang offered secure stabling, hot meals, and credit drafts honored by partner houses 1,000 miles away. Marco Polo marveled at paper money in Kublai Khan's Yuan Empire, a black ink behemoth of mulberry bark signed by imperial treasurer and scented with vermilion seal. Refuse it, and your head joined the decorative stakes outside the city gate, an enforcement mechanism that made FDIC receivership look gentle. Back in Western Christendom, merchants obsessed over temporal soul safety. Canon lawyers finally loosened the no-interest knot by distinguishing between sinful usura, a guaranteed time-based profit, and licit lucrum cessans, compensation for opportunity cost. Thus, a banker could claim he lost potential gain by waiting for repayment and thereby charge a fee. Theological gymnastics gave birth to the service fee, the discount on bills of exchange, and eventually to modern interest disguised as safe, respectable earnings. Cities sprouted civic banks, publicly owned yet privately managed. Barcelona opened the Taula de Canvi in 1401 to stabilize trade battered by Mediterranean piracy. Genoa followed with the Banco di San Giorgio, which doubled as government creditor and de facto state within a state, owning Corsica for a spell and fielding warships financed by depositors. These institutions introduced mandatory reserve ratios centuries before the term existed, forbidding risky lending and insisting capital remain on hand to honor every withdrawal. Bank runs were bad for business, worse for civic pride. Paper crept westward. Rag-based sheets replaced animal parchment, cheap enough to produce ledger copies by the trunkful. Arabic numerals traveled with crusaders, wiping away cumbersome Roman maths. Now a clerk could compile compound interest tables without scribal tears. The step from merchant arithmetic to actuarial science was a single decimal mark on a Florentine bench. Credit and risk mingled at the great European fairs, where Lutheran ironmongers bought pepper from Hindu brokers speaking Portuguese and calculated settlement in Antwerp 2 months hence. Letters of exchange settled at these cosmopolitan nodes formed an invisible web stretching from Delhi's spice warehouses to Andean silver veins. The late medieval world, that supposedly parochial, pulsed with financial synapses sparking across continents. Yet money still reeked of mortality. In 1348, the Black Death roared through, killing bankers and borrowers alike, nullifying ledgers in one gruesome sweep. Survivors found land cheap, wages high, and noble families begging for labor. Credit markets shuddered, then resumed on different terms. Some scholars argue capitalism's engine revved precisely because plague redistributed negotiating power downward. Suddenly a weaver could ask triple wages and still receive an advance on next season's cloth. At sea, Florence's careful columns gave way to buoyant insurance contracts. Genoa's notaries recorded the first marine insurance policy in 1347, guaranteeing reimbursement should storm sink a wool cargo en route to Mallorca. Premiums, computed on wind predictions and pirate activity, calculated risk just as Assyrian merchants had guesstimated caravan attrition. The difference was abstraction. Now half a dozen underwriters, none of whom had ever touched a mast, could split liability and profit, birthing collective risk pools that would eventually morph into Lloyd's Coffee House. Court cases kept pace. Venetian judges arbitrated disputes over misplaced endorsement marks on letters of exchange, that while English chancery courts enforced bonds sealed under merchant law, even when they contradicted feudal custom. Law thus migrated from sword swing to pen stroke. The gavel replaced the lance in determining whose ledger entry prevailed. By 1494, a Pisan friar named Luca Pacioli compiled the chaos into a treatise, Summa de Arithmetica, formalizing double-entry bookkeeping for the literate public. He wrote with evangelical zeal, "Every debit must have a corresponding credit, else the cosmos tilts and Saturn devours his children." Merchants embraced the system as gospel. Leonardo da Vinci, Pacioli's roommate for a time, sketched flying machines while Luca balanced ledgers, two Renaissance dreams, one of air, one of arithmetic, both destined to orbit modern life. When Columbus blundered into the Caribbean with Spanish financing, he didn't just ignite imperial conquest. He opened new columns in Seville's Casa de Contratación ledgers for bullion inflows, slave cargo outflows, and interest on loans floated by Genoese bankers underwriting Castilian crowns. Transoceanic credit replaced caravan routes, specie moved by galleon convoys rather than camel caravans. Risks soared like gulls behind a treasure ship, and so did premiums. Lloyd's of London would soon turn coffee chatter about wreck probabilities into actuarial tables. The medieval experiment was ending, but its financial inventions refused burial. Letters of exchange, double-entry books, marine insurance, and state-backed paper checks formed a toolkit robust enough to finance cathedrals, crusades, and soon cannon-shot empires. What temples began and fairs refined, Renaissance bankers industrialized. The world was almost ready for joint stock corporations, central banks, and speculative frenzies over tulip bulbs and South Sea utopias. Yet amid all this innovation, one ancient truth endured. A promise written is only as strong as the faith behind it. In Champagne, the Lombard banker still swore by his family's honor. In Samarkand, the Sarraf invoked the righteous witness of Allah. In Florence, a Medici agent sealed letters with beeswax bearing the family coat. Confident enemies feared the wrath of Florentine courts. Faith, secular or sacred, grafted flesh onto the numbers. The next act will reveal how that faith was tested by paper money not convertible to metal, by monarchs who waged wars with borrowed billions, by stock exchanges where pieces of paper promise slices of whale oil and spice cargo untold. We will watch bubbles swell, burst, and fertilize new ground. We will stand in Amsterdam's Oudekerk as clerks invent central clearing, slump into a London coffee house smelling of tar and gossip as shipping insurers draw chalk lines of liability, and peer through a Philadelphia printing press as government IOUs transform into the dollar. Picture Amsterdam in the spring of 1609, a tangle of canals glittering like fresh polished coin, windmills thumping out rhythm for 1,000 workshops, and everywhere the smell of herring, hemp rope, and wet ink. You are standing on the Damrock, watching barges unload Baltic timber and Javan pepper, when a burly porter elbows past carrying a wooden chest banded in iron. He is not headed for a spice warehouse. He is trudging toward a tall brick building whose doorway is guarded by clerks in black caps clutching quill pens like pikes. Above the lintel, a gold-lettered plank reads, Whistlebank, the Bank of Amsterdam. Inside, everything is silent, except for pens scratching ledgers thicker than Bibles. Merchants stride in, dump bags of assorted coins, clipped Spanish reales, greasy Venetian ducats, Turkish akçes, and receive a neat entry in a book. So many florins banco, pure, untainted, accepted by every merchant in the city. The bank does not lend these deposits. It freezes them, transforms metal chaos into paper order, and charges a modest fee each time a trader instructs the clerks to move numbers from one page to another. That fee, 0.5% here, a whisper there, finances dikes, almshouses, and eventually a navy muscular enough to swat at Spain. It is the first true central bank, not a temple, not a family firm, but a public utility invented by businessmen to keep businessmen honest. And because Amsterdam's word is now literally as good as gold, global trade accelerates like a gust filling a square-rigged sail. Where money congregates, speculation soon builds grandstands. Across the street, in a draughty bourse smelling of wet wool and tobacco, men in slouch hats trade slips of paper promising tulip bulbs not yet lifted from the mud. A single bulb of the striped Semper Augustus variety changes hands 13 times before lunch, each transfer recorded in crabbed Dutch shorthand on pocket notebooks. By 1637, a bulb costs more than a canal house. Then snap, buyers vanish, prices crater, and amateur financiers trudge home clutching worthless IOUs that yesterday masqueraded as fortune. The tulip mania does not wreck the Dutch economy. The Bank of Amsterdam's hard-nosed ledger keeps systemic collapse at bay. But the bubble leaves behind an immortal moral. Markets can conjure and cancel wealth faster than any monarch swinging a sword. England watches, covets, imitates. London's goldsmiths already perform shadow banking, taking in jewelry for safekeeping, issuing handwritten receipts, then realizing most depositors never reclaim all their metal simultaneously. Why not lend out some idle sovereigns at interest? By the 1660s, goldsmith notes circulate as paper money, each scribble promising to pay on demand. When Charles II stiff-arms his lenders in the Great Stop of the Exchequer, 1667, private trust shivers. The crown needs reliability. Merchants need a referee. Out of that uneasy marriage comes the Bank of England, chartered 1694, tasked with swapping investors and that coin for sealed banknotes, and in return financing a never-ending war chest against Louis XIV. The bank's notes bear a single stark sentence. I promise to pay the bearer on demand the sum of... It is still there 3 centuries later, a ghost of the gold that once rattled inside Threadneedle Street cellars. While the Dutch perfected clearing and the English institutionalized public debt, Paris decided to gamble on charisma. Enter John Law, a Scottish gambler turned economist who convinces the Regent of France that metal is medieval, paper is modern, and national debt can be floated away on a river of banknotes. Law's Banque Générale starts strong. It issues notes convertible to silver, juices trade in the Mississippi Company, and watches share prices soar like fireworks. In 1720, the fireworks douse themselves in panic-driven water. Conversion is suspended, silver runs short, crowds riot, and John Law flees dressed as a woman, pockets jangling with the few coins he can still find. Ever since, French finance has possessed a romantic allergy to Scotsmen promising miracles. Across the Atlantic, colonies are bartering beaver pelts, but they also crave paper. Massachusetts prints its own bills to pay soldiers in 1690, inventing fiat currency in North America decades before independence. The notes wobble in value yet grease local commerce. Benjamin Franklin prints crisp copperplate bills cunningly laced with leaf-veined filigree to deter counterfeiters. When Britain tries to throttle colonial paper with the Currency Act of 1764, merchants seethe. Fiscal grievance joins tea taxes and redcoat quartering on the long march to revolution. The newborn United States issues continentals, which quickly inflate into jokes not worth a continental, teaching Alexander Hamilton the harshness of unanchored promises. As Treasury Secretary, he secures gold-backed federal debt, founds the first bank of the United States, and sells bonds from a window in Philadelphia while crowds jockey like bettors at a racetrack. Liberty, it turns out, needs ledgers. Meanwhile, the slave-powered engines of Caribbean sugar and American cotton create trade bills of staggering volume. In Liverpool, counting houses clerks discount Southern planters' 90-day sugar drafts, flipping them to London investors who clip coupons as casually as they sip port. Insurance, once confined to salty Genoese notaries, now gathers under oak-paneled coffee shop ceilings where brokers holler bids for New World voyages. Edward Lloyd's humble establishment near Tower Street becomes the bulletin board of empire, chalk names of missing ships blending with pipe smoke and gossip. The Industrial Revolution slams on the financial accelerator. Railways require more money than any duke or house bank can muster, so London invents the modern stock exchange. Ordinary clerks subscribe pennies to colossal iron projects, praying steam will transmute coal into dividends. Some lines deliver, others buckle under fraud and geological misfortune. Yet the joint stock principle, risk sliced into tiny, tradable shares, sticks. Soon telegraph wires carry price ticks faster than clipper ships can round Cape Horn, knitting a planet-sized ticker tape. Paper multiplies. Checks, bills, shares, bonds, insurance policies, tall forests die for Victorian file cabinets. To tame the chaos, central banks adopt the lender of last resort creed. Bagehot writes it down in 1873. In a panic, lend freely at a high rate against good collateral. The Bank of England thereby saves solvent but illiquid firms and incidentally anoints itself guardian of the global gold standard. Sterling becomes the lubricant of 90% of world trade. A Calcutta jute exporter invoices in pounds. A Buenos Aires rancher borrows at London rates. A Shanghai comprador cables for sterling drafts. The sun never sets on the overdrafts of the city, but gold's discipline is double-edged. When California, South African, and Yukon mines vomit bullion, credit blossoms. When war or mismanagement drains reserves, banks slam brakes, causing recessions that topple governments. The Great War bulldozes the system entirely. Nations suspend gold convertibility to print vast sums for shells and shrouds. After 1918, they try to bolt the gold standard back on, but exchange rates wobble like wounded biplanes. By 1931, Britain abandons gold. The United States follows 2 years later, and yellow metal retreats to Fort Knox vaults, leaving paper backed not by bullion but by law, tax power, and increasingly, the Federal Reserve's promise that dollars will remain scarce enough tomorrow. Scarcity proves relative. In the 1920s, Americans discover installment credit. Buy ice boxes, radios, and Model Ts today. Pay later in monthly drips. To calculate those drips quickly, IBM sells punch card tabulators to department stores, marrying counting to electricity. Then comes plastic. Bank of America mails 60,000 Bank Americards to unsuspecting Fresno residents in 1958, birthing the credit card industry overnight. Debt migrates from factory captains to suburban housewives buying blenders. World leaders gather in a ramshackle New Hampshire resort in 1944 and craft Bretton Woods. The dollar, pegged to gold, anchors all other currencies. Europe rebuilds on Marshall Plan loans. Japan rides export waves funded by banks flush with American reserves. Yet by 1971, the United States can no longer redeem foreign dollars for gold without emptying Fort Knox. Nixon closes the window. Bretton Woods crumbles. Money is now a free-floating idea measured in confidence, spreadsheets, and the occasional Treasury rescue package. Enter computers, fiber optic cables, high-frequency traders whose algorithms pulse faster than retinal neurons. A Mesopotamian scribe would gawk at the idea of a derivative, a promise based on the future movement of an interest rate, which itself is influenced by promises about inflation expectations. but he would recognize the underlying barter of risk. Credit default swaps, collateralized debt obligations, Bitcoin mined in Siberian server farms, all rely on the same ancient axiom. Belief can be transmuted into value if enough people agree to read the ledger the same way. When the 2008 crisis vaporizes trillions, economists dust off Bagahot again, lending freely but this time at near zero rates, accepting collateral that a Venetian banker would have burned for warmth. Central banks create money with keystrokes, swelling their balance sheets to Mesopotamian temple proportions. Critics scream Reba, others chant Fiat Lux, and markets march on, for there is no temple door sturdy enough to bar capital-seeking yield. And here we stand, tap-paying lattes with near-field chips, watching memes inflate dog-themed cryptocurrencies, wiring rent across continents in seconds. Yet the bones remain recognizable. Our debit cards are clay tablets with LED backlighting. Our ETFs are Medici letters of exchange wearing a synthetic index costume. The Federal Reserve's dot plot is a priest astronomer's star chart predicting next season's harvest of GDP. We still worship at financial temples, only now their icons are candlestick charts scrolling on OLED altars. Will tomorrow's money be quantum-verified strings of qubits or carbon coins traded to ration atmosphere? Perhaps. Whatever shape it assumes, it will demand the same raw material that powered Babylonian granaries and Amsterdam tallies. Trust, enforced by law or lore. Lose that, and we are back to weighing barley in sun-baked courtyards, arguing over whether the scale is tipped. So the next time you swipe a card, sign a mortgage, or day trade a biotech startup you don't understand, pause a second. Feel the ghostly press of a scribe smoothing wet clay beneath a reed stylus, the chill of a Dutch clerk's ink drying on rag paper, the weight of a gold sovereign clinking in a foggy London counting house. Finance is not a cold machine. It is a 5,000-year-long conversation about hope, fear, greed, and cooperation. And each of us, every transaction, scribbles one more line in the eternal ledger.